Tonight, record spending and a record deficit in Ontario's latest budget.
Our deficit is projected to be $38.5 billion.
Funding for hospitals, tax breaks for businesses, and incentives to travel locally. We'll bring you the numbers. Plus,
as Ontario continues to see high COVID numbers and missing the target on testing, some communities are making it easier for people to get tested. I'm Angelina King in Flemington Park. I'll have more on these pop-up testing sites and where you can find them.
And a doctor opens up about the grief healthcare workers are dealing with during the second wave of COVID-19. Good evening, I'm Talia Ricci. This pandemic-era budget is one the government says is designed to help the province recover. Here are a few highlights. A tourism tax credit to get people to travel in Ontario, a home reno tax credit for seniors, families with children 12 or younger will get an additional $200 per child for education expenses, and tax breaks for businesses. It all adds up to a budget deficit this year of $38.5 billion. The government says this budget will lay the groundwork for an economic recovery from COVID-19. Our Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley takes us through it.
Government Notice of Motion number 94, Mr. Phillips.
I recognize Finance.
Rod Phillips rises to deliver a budget in the midst of a historic pandemic with the biggest deficit in Ontario history.
Our deficit is projected to be $38.5 billion.
The red ink just keeps flowing with no path back to balance in sight.
We will do whatever it takes to protect and support the people of Ontario, today, tomorrow, and every day.
Much of the COVID-related health spending in the budget has previously been announced. One new item, an extra $570 million for hospitals to get through the winter waves of the pandemic.
Mr. Ford is waving a white flag in the battle against COVID-19 and telling people you're on your own.
The budget includes new COVID-related money for people, a home renovation tax credit for seniors and live-in grandparents. It's 25% on renos up to $10,000.
People are realizing now more than ever how vital their homes are, and of course how vital it is for seniors to be able to be safe in their homes.
For families with young kids, another $200 payment for each child under 12, a repeat of payments sent out this spring. There's also a new incentive to travel within the province, a proposed 20% tax credit on tourism expenses.
But I think it'll be a powerful tool, and I think 2021 will be the year of the Ontario staycation.
For tourism workers and employees in other sectors hard hit by the pandemic, there's a new training fund to get skills to switch jobs. There's also more than $1 billion benefiting business, hundreds of millions in cuts to business property taxes, the employer health tax, and subsidized hydro.
What we have to do, Mike, we have to create the environment for companies to come here rather than leave our province to other areas south of the border.
Now, the bill that goes along with this budget would change 44 different pieces of legislation, and we didn't have a chance to see that before the budget speech. And since the Ford government has been putting things that have absolutely nothing to do with COVID into its legislation, you know that that's going to get a lot of close scrutiny from the opposition. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, Mike mentioned the tax breaks businesses will be getting. The Ford government is earmarking billions of dollars to support this part of the economy. Lorenda Redekop has details on what they can expect.
When the pandemic is over, Ontario will come back with vengeance, stronger and more prosperous than ever before.
The Premier talked recovery. This budget includes support for businesses, large and small. Many have been struggling through the pandemic. Here's some of the new help on the way. $450 million a year to reduce property taxes, available for nearly all businesses. Plus $385 million a year to allow municipalities to reduce business property taxes. $360 million a year to permanently exempt businesses with up to a $1 million payroll from the employer health tax. And for larger businesses, $1.3 billion over the next 3 years to reduce the electricity bill by around 15% for commercial and industrial businesses.
This cost on business is costing us jobs.
As they were leaving out the door a while ago, they were saying, how can you be competitive with the electricity costs that we're facing here in Ontario?
They say the impacts will trickle down. The opposition doesn't see that.
The government is pretending that they're fixing the hydro mess, and they're not. They're just kicking it down the road and shifting the costs to everyday families.
She says for small businesses most at risk, this budget won't save them.
A future hydro or tax cut won't help a boarded up business.
Ontario has partnered with the federal government to offer commercial rent assistance during the pandemic. This budget doesn't appear to offer further help, but overall, Ontario's Chamber of Commerce is pleased with this budget.
Some significant tax relief, significant cuts in the cost of electricity, which will make our members, put our members finally in a position that is competitive vis-a-vis the neighboring U.S. states.
This is a much later budget than usual due to the pandemic. Next year's budget will come in the spring. Lorenda Redikoff, CBC News, Toronto.
And a quick update for you now on the race for the White House. Ballots are still being counted in key battleground states like Georgia and Pennsylvania. And Joe Biden has made big gains in those states late this afternoon. Donald Trump is leading in Georgia, but only by about 1,700 votes, with 99% of the state reporting. In Pennsylvania, another very tight race. Trump leading there by about 26,000, with 94% of the state reporting. Both states too close to call at this hour, as are Arizona, Nevada, and South Carolina. The Electoral College vote tally hasn't changed since yesterday. Joe Biden's still sitting at 253, and Donald Trump is holding at 214. Remember, the successful candidate needs 270 to clinch the presidency. And back here at home, Ontario reported 998 new COVID-19 cases. As the numbers remain high and hotspots prepare to ease restrictions, testing still continues to be a challenge. So, a health network in Toronto's East End is opening new pop-up testing locations to help. As Angelina King tells us, they're in neighborhoods that need it most.
For those who live in Flemington Park, the closest COVID-19 testing center was 2 or 3 bus rides away. Now there's one right in the neighborhood. Jamal Abdul wishes it was open when he got tested last month. Instead of taking 2 buses, he could have just walked down the street.
More convenient for the area and this area.
Abdullah tested positive and still wonders where he got the virus.
Really, I don't know where would he get it. I don't know exactly.
East Toronto Health Partners has set up 7 pop-up testing sites. 5 are new and opened or are opening this week, and 2 set up in the spring reopened in September and are extended through this month. They're run by healthcare staff from each community and will test everyone, including people experiencing homelessness or those without internet access, offering drop-in testing and same-day appointments that don't need to be booked online.
And the goal of these testing sites is to be able to bring access and bring testing close to where people live in order to decrease the barriers and make sure that folks get tested as soon as possible.
Jen Quinlan is also a member of East Toronto Health Partners and says staff analyzed data to decide where the sites were needed most.
Due to either low testing uptake, so folks not being able to get a test, or high positivity. So when folks did get tests, there was a higher than expected positive rate.
Today, Ontario reported 35,754 completed tests, up after 3 straight days of testing below 30,000, but still a ways away from the province's capacity of 50,000. With modified Stage 2 restrictions easing in Toronto next weekend, this epidemiologist says testing is key.
So we have a better sense of what's going on, and so that we can find cases and ideally get back on track with contact tracing.
The pop-up testing sites are scheduled to close at the end of the month, and then East Toronto Health Partners will reassess what the community needs after that. Angelina King, CBC News, Toronto.
And big news out of Oshawa today. Unifor and GM have struck a $1.3 billion deal to reopen the shuttered auto plant. Chris Glover has the details on that.
This sticker shows David Welch's GM truck was built in Indiana, and it drives him crazy.
Still GM truck, but ours were better.
After working at GM Oshawa for 32 years, the plant had stopped making trucks when he bought his. Now he just learned a new $1.3 billion tentative deal to revive his beloved truck assembly line in Oshawa.
It was the best in the world. Nobody could beat us. So, you know, a little bit of pride there. Maybe a lot of pride.
The union struck the deal with GM at 3 a.m.
To say that we never gave up hope. And frankly, neither did General Motors.
In December 2019, GM halted all vehicle production in Oshawa.
It was rough. It was pretty depressing.
It deflated a community that's relied on GM as a key employer for nearly a century.
Selling out on SOS.
Rock legend Sting even threw a benefit concert for the Oshawa plant last year. Family doctor Michael Sahavi saw firsthand the suffering the closure caused.
I saw a lot more depression and anxiety. I saw a lot of people sort of confused as to what they were going to do.
Today's tentative deal includes building a brand new body shop and truck assembly line in Oshawa, and it's expected to create at least 2,000 jobs. At this Oshawa tire shop, Dana Roth thinks there'll be a trickle-down benefit.
We will definitely see an uptake in the tires that are being sold, the rims and whatnot and everything else. You put 2,000 people into work, and that's a lot of money that's going back into the economy.
The union head, alongside Oshawa's mayor, says for every one GM job, 10 others will be created.
Yeah, to be honest, I got a text message this morning at 4:30 in the morning, and it said, Mayor Carter, be prepared to be the happiest mayor in all of Canada. I can say that they were absolutely correct.
The union's tentative GM deal follows agreements with Ford and Fiat Chrysler this summer. Altogether, they represent $4.7 billion in auto industry investment in southern Ontario.
I think this is a real home run. It's a real win for the economy of Ontario, certainly a home run for the economy of Canada.
The goal is to have the first heavy-duty truck drive off the assembly line January 2022. Maybe David Welch's upgrade in a few years can be a local. Chris Glover, CBC News, Oshawa.
A Toronto police officer has been sentenced to 9 months in jail for assaulting Oshawa teen Devontae Miller. The assault happened in 2016 when Michael Theriault was off duty. Justice Joseph DeLuca says the sentence doesn't undo what happened to Miller, but he hopes it deters others from abusing their power. Natalie Nanowski has the details.
Constable Michael Theriault was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Devontae Miller was not at the Oshawa courthouse, only Theriault's family. They left quickly and avoided media. In June, Theriault was convicted of assault instead of aggravated assault for the beating that left Miller blind in one eye. Miller's lawyer spoke today on behalf of the family.
The 9 months imprisonment is a fit sentence, but it will never create closure for a young man whose life is forever changed.
Justice Joseph DeLuca says he weighed the decision carefully, speaking about the role race plays in a police encounter, adding police are sworn and duty-bound to protect all members of the community. When a police officer commits a criminal offense, he or she breaches the community's trust.
He will serve time behind bars, or most likely will serve some time behind bars, of course, pending an appeal. Tells people that, police officers in this country cannot always, anyway, act with impunity.
It's a small step that many say doesn't go far enough to address the systemic racism Black people face.
We need a wholesale change in our approach to law enforcement.
Along with serving 9 months in jail, Theriault will have to serve 12 months probation, submit a DNA sample, and is banned from owning a weapon for 5 years. The judge noted today that all of this will likely lead to Theriault's dismissal from the Toronto Police Force. Theriault is currently suspended without pay. A tribunal will determine whether he keeps his job. His lawyers are appealing the conviction. In a statement issued to the media ahead of today's sentencing, Devontae Miller said, "Throughout this process, all I have ever wanted was for those responsible for causing me harm and altering my life be held accountable." Natalie Nanowski, CBC News, Oshawa.
I think what's not getting discussed a lot is the emotional pain, the soul pain that I think frontline health workers are experiencing.
Coming up after the break, I sit down with Nahid Doseni, a palliative care physician who opens up about the grief healthcare workers are experiencing and why it's something we should talk about. Plus,
we are in for another treat with the forecast for tomorrow. I'm meteorologist Colette Kennedy. If it's possible, it's actually going to be slightly better than today. I'll explain how coming up.
the second wave of COVID-19 has been tough on healthcare workers. They're in high-risk environments, working longer hours, and witnessing more suffering. I sat down with a palliative care physician who runs grief circles for frontline workers. He talked about some of the things he's experiencing right now.
We are trained to support people who are suffering, but sometimes we are not so good at thinking about that for ourselves. This pandemic has brought that to the forefront.
Something that you put out on Twitter caught my attention, and it was about the grief that frontline workers are experiencing during the second wave. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I have colleagues and friends who have been separated from their family members for days and weeks at a time to protect their children, for example, which has taken an immense emotional toll. I have colleagues who've worked long hours and shifts, longer than they normally would, and I've had colleagues who've taken on roles outside of their full-time roles. So people are definitely stretched and expanding their scope and their work in numerous ways, and I don't know that the grief, loss, suffering, and trauma that we're experiencing is being addressed in the ways that it needs to be.
So I know you started the grief circles well before the pandemic, but tell me a bit about how they've changed during COVID-19.
We've noticed that the grief circles have increased in frequency. Like, we are having more grief circles than ever before, probably because there's more grief than ever before, also because we're supporting clients who are sicker than ever before and are passing away even earlier in their trajectories. There's some silver linings in this, and it's probably been that the virtual circles has made our community closer. We may be further apart physically and not seeing each other, but online through the virtual grief circles, we're closer than ever.
What would you want people to know about how the second wave of COVID-19 is currently impacting healthcare workers and people on the front lines?
What's not getting discussed a lot is the emotional pain, the soul pain that I think frontline health workers are experiencing. And while we're trained to be in these scenarios, many of us are seeing these scenarios at a higher frequency and more death than we ever could have imagined. And that sometimes takes a toll, and I try not to personally bring that home to my wife or my family per se, but that's really hard to do in and of itself. And that if you know a health worker, if you know a frontline worker or an essential service worker out there who's been serving the community, reach out. Be there for them. Give them that extra chance or that extra moment to be patient with them during this trying time.
Partly cloudy, but clearing in Toronto overnight after another spring-like November day. Meteorologist Colette Kennedy joins us now, and the week of good weather news continues.
Thanks, Talia. Well, we had it. Another beautiful day. Some subtle differences, however, and one of the things we saw today was some of that high, thin cirrus cloud. And so you could still get some sunshine coming through it, but it did, kind of put a cap on our temperatures. Not really when you're talking about them being so significantly above seasonal. We'll take a look at some of the numbers from this afternoon, but I will just say there'll be more full sun, especially kind of early in the day, and then we'll see some clouds, a few more clouds, so kind of variable skies into the afternoon, but a lot of sun to go around, especially not just Friday, into Saturday as well. The warmth, does it continue? Yes, the answer, it is yes. All through the weekend and even beyond to about midweek. That's when we're going to start to see some changes. So at this point, the timing looks like that we'll start to lose this ridge as we go towards about late Tuesday into Wednesday. And so Wednesday being kind of our transition day when we'll start to see the temperatures just beginning to change as the winds change from the southwest more towards the northwest, and we'll get some showers coming through, but dry conditions till then, and these temperatures well above seasonal. So this is how they look this afternoon. So incredible readings. Ottawa, nearly to 20 degrees, 19 there in Peterborough. Winds are a little extra, not just cloud cover, but some haze off and on through the day today. So 17, Toronto, 18 degrees. By tomorrow, we may be looking at several records. We'll kind of see how it goes through the day. It depends, but around the GTA, most of the records tend to be around 20 degrees, and there's some cases where they're closer to 18. So we'll see what happens here. All right, what's ahead? Well, we're seeing the clearing as we go through the overnight. The sunshine, as I mentioned, more of it for tomorrow than what we necessarily had today as we get rid of some of that higher cloud cover. And into Saturday, full on sinking air, very stable conditions, and that's why it is going to be quite a glorious weekend. I mean, a real treat. I've been saying this over and over, but you know, it's not unusual to get a few mild days in November, but to get into one of these blocking patterns where we're into the ridge, and it's not just us here in Ontario, it's a huge chunk of North America, seeing record temperatures as we go into this weekend. Well, it is unusual to have so many days of it. I mean, a full week, really, by the time it all is said and done. So overnight tonight, clear skies for you into southwestern Ontario. Yes, Windsor, I do think you're going to get up to 20 degrees for tomorrow. Southwesterly flow kicks in again, a little breezier into the afternoon. And the range of temperatures you're going to see tonight around the Golden Horseshoe, and for tomorrow, probably up to about 20 degrees there in St. Catharines. 19 now closer to the lakeshore. Of course, it's a little bit cooler for Toronto, but 19 likely at Pearson. And there you go, right through the weekend. Incredible, and likely in here at times. Some days we're going to hit some records here, I tell you.
Well, it looks like the best November week ever. Thanks, Colette.
The weather is brought to you by Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. We test, so it runs. It's hard to stop a train.
As a way to honor our veterans, over 12,000 Canadian flags will be displayed at Manulife's headquarters. It's the 6th year the building on Bloor has placed the flags on their front lawn. This year marks a special anniversary, 75 years since the end of the Second World War. The flags are meant to honor members of the Canadian Armed Forces who lost their lives in service. And of course, that's ahead of Remembrance Day next week. That's our show for you tonight. Thanks so much for watching. Dwight Drummond has your next local newscast tomorrow at 6, and Kelda Yoon has you covered at 11. Good night.